Boy, old Uncle Joe is dedicated to continuing the Great Green Grift for, I guess, the rest of his administration, no matter how bad the energy picture gets, how expensive electricity and gas gets. He is going to keep making the problem worse, I guess, in the name of trying to further the goals of the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum. After all, his campaign slogan was Build Back Better, the slogan of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. So it was pretty clear from the beginning that, his campaign was being run by them, and that, he didn't have much of a campaign of his own. We know that he's mentally gone. And those are the people, I guess, who are pulling the strings, because after all this, after what's going on with the oil markets, thanks to those boobs in Europe trying to completely just sabotage the global oil market and reroute Russian energy from the pipelines into Europe, into India, and then I guess the Indians are going to ship it through the Suez Canal or something into Europe. This just completely screwed up the whole oil markets. And, of course, fertilizer, because the Russians produce natural gas, which also goes into pipelines, and now the Europeans are going to have to import those natural gas-derived products like fertilizer from the United States, the Belarusian potash, which I believe is a source of potassium, another important component of fertilizer. And so all this ties back to energy, and more importantly, to fossil fuels. And so what's the Biden administration response? Are they going to open up more drilling? Because, they like to brag. Oh, well, the United States is pumping more oil than they ever have before under any other president. Well, yeah, no shit. The economy is technically, growing. Well, not now, but it was for the first year of Biden's administration. The economy technically grew, by a very small percentage, but by a percentage nonetheless. And there's a direct correlation between fossil fuel consumption and economic growth. And so we have to be consuming more fossil fuels all the time in order to not be in a recession. So yes, that means that fossil fuel production is increasing. But is it increasing by enough? The answer is no. We need to increase a lot faster. We need to pump ever more oil out of the earth. And we need to dig, ever more increasing amounts of coal out of the earth. And we have the resources to do that. We can accomplish that. And the Biden administration still chooses not to. Instead, he invokes the Defense Production Act to reduce tariffs on solar panels. But not from China, I think. I think I saw that he's getting rid of tariffs on solar panels from all of these other non-Chinese, Asian nations that produce solar panels, but in much smaller numbers. We know that the solar industry, really the entire green industry, is based out of China. I've talked about this before. I mean, it's the green industry is built off of rare earth minerals, not things that you can dig up out of the ground anywhere. A lot of these minerals are found largely in China. China has huge deposits of these. Of course, they also have the labor force and the manufacturing power to produce these goods, and so they're a natural fit. The United States, really, we are not in as strong of a position, even if we had a better industrial sector, to produce things like solar panels and lithium batteries. It's just not going to take off here. There will never be the equivalent of the American auto industry in the 1940s in the green, in the new green era that they're trying to build. Not going to happen. We're going to import this crap from China. We're going to import Chinese lithium cells. We're going to import Chinese solar panels. And a reporter pointed that out to the White House press secretary today. They said, hey, isn't all this crap about you trying to shove solar panels that aren't that efficient down our throat? Because they aren't. When you factor in how much it costs to produce these solar panels. They go, well, the solar panels are a lot cheaper than they used to be. Yes, but they still produce relatively little energy. And they don't last forever. And they consume extremely scarce natural resources. And I haven't looked into the recycling of solar panels, but if it's at all like recycling a lithium battery, it's pretty much a dead end. But I don't know that for a fact, so I'm not. Don't hold me to that. I don't know. It might be that solar panels are 100% recyclable, though I doubt that. And you also have to factor in the energy that must be expended to recycle those raw materials and build something new from them. And there's going to be some attrition rate. What is the attrition rate? As I've said time after time in the past, an internal combustion engine that is not electronic, pure 100% mechanical, there's a 0% attrition rate. You can melt down every ounce of iron ore out of that engine block, and all those components, all the connecting rods, the crankshaft, the camshaft, the valves, the lifters. Well, I guess the spring steel doesn't hold. I'm not exactly sure how spring steel is made, so maybe that part isn't that recyclable, the springs. But let's leave that aside. Actually, you can build engines without springs. What am I talking about? You could build a two-stroke. Two-strokes don't have any springs, I think. Of course, there's always going to be a spring on the throttle, but anyway, I'm getting off in the weeds. This solar infrastructure, it's not very durable. I think the Germans have found that out. Germans tried to mass adopt solar like in the mid-2000s. Hasn't worked out that great. It's just not going to get a very high energy density. Solar, I think, is a good idea. I like it in principle, but it's really more useful as something that an individual uses on their own home. And even then, the system requires maintenance. It's not as simple as just plugging a wire into your house and then running a generator off of coal fire and steam to generate 24 hours electricity, for an entire community. And so needless to say, this is not going to solve the energy needs or the problems of even America at its current demand, levels of demand for energy. And especially if we start getting into this electric car nonsense, the demands in the electric grid, think about it, all of the energy that currently we get from gasoline, they're trying to shift that burden, the burden that is supported by gasoline, onto our electric grid, which is already under strain because they're shutting down coal-fired power plants. As the population expands, we need, especially if they want to have people to drive electric cars, and they're subsidizing it to the tune of like $12,000 a piece, I think. You need to be building a lot more coal-fired power plants. We need to be digging a lot more coal out of the ground. We need to be finding new coal mines. We need to be strip mining this entire country, looking for coal to burn to generate all this stupid electricity to power these Tesla cars. Is it possible for everybody to get their power off of solar? Yes. If everyone's house, every single person, had solar panels lining their roofs, yeah, you could generate enough power. The question is, at that point, how much is it going to cost? The costs would be ridiculous. That's why we don't do that. If we could, and it was cheaper than burning coal, if it was reasonable, everyone would already do that. If it was cheaper to power your own house with solar than it was to just pay your electric bill every month, your electric bill that's generated from nuclear, coal, hydroelectric perhaps, but really not from wind and solar. Even though we have these giant solar farms in Florida, hundreds of acres of solar panels out in the field, they don't generate that much power. They don't. The density is not there. And so getting back to what I was saying, the power that you get from the electric company, even though the electric company makes, at times, some pretty ridiculous profits, it's still substantially cheaper than it would cost you to generate that electricity on your own with solar panels. Why is that? Because solar panels are expensive compared to coal. They're expensive to produce, and then not only do you have to buy the solar panels themselves, if you want to be off the grid, if you want to have 24-hour power, and if you had an entire grid even that was on solar, you would need this. You would need batteries to store electricity for you to consume when there is no sunlight. And the same thing's true if it's wind. You need to have batteries to store power for you to consume when the wind isn't blowing. This is pretty basic stuff. Even though, and these batteries, they're like the batteries in a Tesla. They can spontaneously combust. They're very, very expensive to produce. They're very, very expensive to replace. And they're not very recyclable. They're made of elements from the earth, which are, comparatively speaking, extremely rare when you compare them to iron ore, oil, coal, or natural gas. So none of this crap adds up. If it did add up, guess what? The electric companies, especially when you consider how many incentives there already are from the federal government on this crap, they would have implemented it all. But instead, we see a negative correlation between parts of the grid that adopt more alternative energy, like solar. We see a negative correlation between alternative energy adoption and reliability and cost, or in inexpensiveness, whatever you want to call it. It's the end of the day. I'm not, my words are not perfect. I don't have the best words. But the energy that is produced by from these alternative sources, like solar, that the president is pushing so hard, just like Obama before him, we had Solyndra. It's more expensive. It's less reliable. It's that simple. Coal, it's abundant. It's reliable. It can go 24 hours a day. We understand it. It's from the earth. People are afraid of fire. That's the only reason why we don't have it. They hate coal because it involves fire. They hate oil because it involves fire. I can't tell you how primitive it is for human beings to reject the greatest advancement in human history, and that is the mastery of fire. Human history is, in its most basic form, a story of learning to harness fire, because the more we've been able to harness the energy from fire, the more efficiently we've been able to do that. Because fire is, early humans understood, fire, it's a huge force on this planet. It's big, it's scary, yes, it's dangerous, yes, but it's powerful. And in learning to harness power, even primitively and inefficiently, as cave people, Homo sapiens were able to become the dominant species on the planet. And throughout history, we've gotten better and better. We developed ovens to retain heat so that we could get more out of the fire. We weren't just cooking over an open flame. We discovered coal, which had a higher energy density than wood. We burned this coal in great furnaces and accomplished a lot of work. We produced steam, and that steam could drive pistons, which would turn a crankshaft, much like the engine in your car. Then we discovered oil, which we could harness and do even greater things in smaller packages with than we could with coal. It was easier to start and stop a petroleum-powered engine. And what all of these alternative energy plans really have in common is rejection of fire. And this will be the downfall of the West. Vladimir Putin pointed this out this week. I think it was in his interview that he gave for Russian state television, but he was talking about how the West is just infatuated with these alternative energies that don't work as well as traditional energy. And like I said before, in a even relatively free market, energy is not a free market in the West, not by a long shot, but even in a relatively free market where there's any competition, if these alternative methods of energy, especially when there's so much support behind them, if they were more efficient or even as efficient as traditional forms of energy, we'd all be using it. The fact that they're having to force it tells you that they are less efficient. They produce less energy for the same cost, meaning you will have access to less energy because your energy budget isn't going to increase. We're not producing more elsewhere. We're not becoming more efficient in our production to the point to where we need less energy to produce the same amount of goods. If that were the case, if we were becoming much more efficient in our production, we didn't need as much energy, then we could absorb the costs of higher energy and still maintain the same standard of living. But as it is, there's a direct correlation between not even just how much energy we consume, how much fossil fuels we consume. That's how little of a blip the alternative energy sources are really making. In order for our economy to grow, we need more energy than we have now. And so everything that we're witnessing, it's not hard to figure out. We're being made poorer. Eventually, if this trend continues, ordinary people will own nothing. And you're going to have to ask yourself, if that's the case, will you be happy like the World Economic Forum says? Or will you be mad as hell? Because that's what Build Back Better is all about. It's about building a Western society in which people live in pods. They take their self-driving taxi Tesla to work. They consume less energy. They don't have heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer. They don't have their own car because there's not enough electricity for that, and there's not enough batteries. There's not enough natural resources to produce all the batteries for everyone to have a car. That's why we're going to have to go back to living in pods in apartment buildings rather than living in single-family homes. Maybe some of you have noticed, if you live in suburban areas, that over the last few years, they've been rapidly building these 5-story wood frame apartment buildings and trying to move away from single-family homes. This is a part of that trend. So, with all that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.